Hi everybody, it's Mr. Hague with a video about taking care of your clarinet, things to think about when putting it together, handling the case, mouthpiece, and the reed. The first thing is the case. Don't open a clarinet case like this. This is the way you hold a clarinet case, but if you open the case like this, the parts and pieces are going to spill out onto the floor and you could damage them. Always open the clarinet flat on whatever surface you're on. Table, chair, bed, floor, doesn't matter. Flat on the surface. Then when we open it, all the pieces are inside and they haven't fallen out. Let's talk about things to think about when we're putting the instrument together. The first thing is to recognize that on both of these upper and lower joints, there's a lot of mechanisms. That's one of the reasons we like clarinets, is there's a lot going on, a lot to look at, a lot to manipulate. But these metal pieces, these rods and keys, even though we think of metal as being strong and durable, they're actually quite delicate because this is thin metal. And if they get bent out of shape, they can be bad for several reasons. The first reason it can be a problem is that each of these rods has a tiny little screw in the end that's keeping it together. And if the rod gets bent, even a little bit, the screw will work itself out, will back itself out over time, and eventually you can lose the screw because it's small and tiny, and that means the instrument pieces will start to fall off the instrument, and that could be really bad. The second reason it's a problem is because each of these rods is responsible for controlling keys that cover up tone holes. And if the rod becomes out of alignment, gets bent, it's possible that the key itself could be bent, which means it's not completely covering the tone hole, and that means we can't make the sounds and pitches that we're trying to make. So that's why when we're putting an instrument together like the clarinet, we always want to grab it in places where there's the fewest mechanisms to mess up. Just the strength of a single hand can bend long rods in a way that we don't want. So on the lower joint, we're going to grip it around the bottom where there's less going on. And on the upper joint, we're going to do the opposite. On the upper joint, we're actually going to grip it around the top of the instrument because there's fewer mechanisms up top. And because this is a connection with a tenon connection with cork, we're going to gently rotate back and forth as we press the two parts of the instrument body together. And we know it's aligned when the holes, the tone holes of the top and bottom joints, the upper and bottom lower joints, are lined up. That's the first part. The second thing is our bell, the bell of the instrument, which is shaped like a bell, and we put that on the bottom of the instrument. There's another cork tenon connection point, which means we're going to gently rotate as we put that on. And then we're going to set this part of the instrument aside for just a moment, and we're going to start talking about the barrel, which is essentially just a tube. It's kind of like the throat or collar of the instrument. And we're going to talk about our mouthpiece and ligature. The mouthpiece and ligature work with the reed. Here is an example of a reed that's in its protective plastic case. When I put these pieces together, I'm going to start with the mouthpiece and the barrel before I even bother with the reed. So on this barrel, you can just barely tell, but there's a narrow end and a wider end, and we're going to work with the narrow end. There's another cork tenon connection point, so we're going to gently rotate as we put those together. Now the nice thing about this is I can hold on to the barrel and put my reed on, and I don't have to worry about messing up the reed when I go to put this on the instrument because I have another place I can grab. So after I get the reed set just right and I get the ligature on there just right, I don't have to worry about messing this up because I have something else I can grab onto to put it on the rest of the instrument. That's important. A reed is a piece of wood, and we think about wood being very strong, very durable, and it often is when it's making a building or a door or a desk. But the truth is, this is very, very thin, as you can see there, almost paper thin, which means it's very delicate, and we need to protect it because this is arguably the most important part of the entire instrument. This is what vibrates, what oscillates to make the sound very quickly as our air passes over it to produce the tone. So that's why we always want to protect the tip of it. In fact, even when you're putting it in and taking it out of the plastic case, or putting it in probably, you want to be careful of that tip because you don't want to nick the end of it. You don't want to chip the end of the reed because that'll make it harder to play. The reed needs to have some moisture in it in order to work properly. So the first thing we're going to do is introduce moisture to it by letting it sit in our mouth. I don't have the entire reed in there, just the thin part, the blade. And I didn't have it in there very long because I've used this reed recently. But if it's brand new, or if it's been a while since you played, it's going to be extremely dry and you might need to let it sit in there for longer. Not dripping wet, just enough to get moisture in there, and it may change the color of it to be a little bit more translucent. Every reed has a flat side that's got the brand name and the strength printed on it. It's also got a beveled side, and a bevel is like an angle. So you can probably barely see that there's an angle to that side, whereas the other one's flat. And the same way, the mouthpiece has a flat side called the table with the window in there where the air goes through, and it's got a beveled side, an angled side. We always put the flat side of the reed against the flat side of the mouthpiece, and that's how they work together. We don't have the reed showing beyond the mouthpiece. That's wrong. We also don't have the opposite. We don't have the window of the mouthpiece showing beyond the reed. Instead, we have both of them aligned perfectly with the tips together like that. I'm going to hold it with one thumb while I've got my ligature in the other hand, and I'm going to gently slip the ligature over the top. I want to be careful as I'm doing this. Just like when I'm putting the reed away in its case, I don't want to actually chip the end of the reed with the metal ligature. The ligature holds the reed onto the mouthpiece in the same way that ligament holds muscle to bone in our body. One more thing about this, and this can be a little difficult to see on my ligature in particular because of the way it's designed. The mouthpiece itself has a narrow end and a wide end. And even though you can't particularly tell on this ligature, every clarinet ligature has a narrow end and a wider end. So if I try to put them upside down, it won't go down all the way. It won't fit. But if I line it up properly, it fits every time. I've got the screws on the same side as the reed, and I've got the entire ligature below this ridge, this curved cliff or ridge, corner almost. I want to have the ligature below that, which means even after I tighten the ligature, there's still going to be a gap between both sides. That's completely okay. I don't have to close that gap. That's not necessary. In fact, I don't want that, because if I crank this ligature too tight with these screws, the reed can't vibrate anymore. And if it can't vibrate, it can't do its job. So I'm going to make a little micro adjustment on that reed so it's just where I want it. Tighten the ligature only enough to hold the reed on there, not to stop it from vibrating. And now that I took all that time to get this ready, I want to grab this by the barrel so I'm not messing up what I just got perfect with the reed. Here's another cork tenon connection point, which means I'm going to gently rotate, twisting back and forth as I put the barrel onto the body. And I know when it's lined properly when the reed on the back is lined up with the register key and the thumb. Here's the front of my instrument that's got all the tone holes lined up, the upper to lower joint, but the reed is on the back side. Now let's talk about how to hold it for playing. On all woodwind instruments, the left hand's on top, the right hand's on bottom. Doesn't matter if you're right-handed or left-handed, that's just the way they all work. You can see that your clarinet has a thumb rest, that's for your right hand. That helps hold the instrument, helps support the weight while your fingers do all the work of the keys. The upper hand, the left hand on the top has 3 holes that it's covering. First, second, and third. First, second, and third. And the right hand on the bottom, 4, 5, and 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.